Cool. All right, so in new site 5, what did we do? What are 2 things that we kind of wired up? We wired up the ability, an add articles page that enables us to add an article, make a post request using the fetch API. And then we also created a login page, enables us, that's kind of just like a dummy page right now that takes in a user and takes in a password and just like console logs it out. So in new site 6, we're going to take it one step further. So high level objectives, wire up the login page. When the login form is submitted, post login credentials to the login API endpoint and store the access token that's returned in the response from the API in app.js's state. So that's a lot to unpack. So generally when you like log in as a user, it makes like a post request to whatever database, it validates that user is in fact a user by their username, password, and maybe some other types of credentials that a user might have to type in, but it's usually just username and password. And what is returned is, it can be a couple of things. It could be a login token. You can have like a session ID. There's several things, but in this case, we're going to take back a token. A token is just a bunch of alphanumeric characters that's really long that associates a token. So that token is associated with that user. And the benefit of that, so if you want to limit some functionality to only logged in users, you instead of just storing a username and password in state to say like, is the user logged in, it can store a token, and that token enables access to certain functionality throughout a website, or it enables a user to remain logged in for a period of time if the user doesn't log out. So if you're in like Facebook or anything and you log in and you navigate away from the page, like you close out the tab, the browser, you come back and you just go into Facebook and it automatically has you logged in. That is because there's a token, there's an access token that's stored that's associated with that user. And it's like, hey, this person has this access token and it's active right now. The person has not logged out yet. So this person still has access to this website. So instead of the user having to log in every single time, type in their username and password, not a lot, but you can also have those tokens expire after a certain amount of time. So if like the user logs in and exit the page or exit the app, and then say so many days later, the user comes back and the access token has another field that says like created at. So the token is an alphanumeric character, like a random string of alphanumeric characters. And then it has a created at. So whatever day and time that token was created at. So if a user comes back and there's some logic, some function that says, hey, if the user comes back after 1 week after the token was created, it expire that token automatically and like delete it. So the user, to force the user to log back in and to create another token. So that's one thing that's like about access tokens and authentication. So that's what we'll be doing here. We'll have to re-architect some of our app because we want to store a user, whether a user is logged in or not, and we want to pass that user around to different components. Number 2, modify app nav.js to show login link if a user isn't logged in, and a logout link if a user is logged in. So when you click login and you type in login, have that login link to switch to logout. Because once a user is logged in, we don't want it to say, login still, because the user is already logged in. And then only show add an article link when a user is logged in, and include the user's access token to the now protected add article API endpoint. So here, we're only allowing the user to add an article if the user is logged in. So if the user is not logged in and you try to add an article, it's going to throw an error. So if a user is logged in, only show add an article link when a user is logged in. And then we're going to have to include the user's access token to the article API endpoint. Single page authentication overview and single page apps, the authentication login flow looks something like this. So user navigates to login page. After entering their credentials and hitting submit, the login credentials are set to an API endpoint or a web service. The API checks the credentials. If they're valid, an access token is returned. The access token is automatically created for us on our backend. That's in our Express server, so we don't have to worry about where that access token is coming from at the moment. And then it says request made to protected API endpoints require a user's access token. If a token is not included in the request to a protected endpoint, or the token has expired, that's where if we decide to set a limit on whether or not we want that token to expire after a certain amount of time, a 401 unauthorized response status code is returned. If the token is valid, then the request resource is returned successfully, just like a basic 200 response. When any API request is made with a valid token, the token's expiration is extended, so it kind of like resets. If a user is inactive for a certain amount of period of time, the token will expire and the user will be asked to log in again. I kind of went over this already, this part. So the initial setup, we need to git clone, and then we want to copy over all what we did from yesterday. Just copy over the entire source folder directory. After copying your source directory, you run npm run update app. This command will update a few unit tests in your source directory. Once you perform the steps above, run npm install, npm run start, and don't forget to npm install any other libraries that aren't already included, or install other libraries that you included in your app that aren't already in the package.json file. Verify that no errors appear in your browser, console, or terminal, and that your app functions the same as it did in the last challenge. Okay. I'm going to come here. So I'm in my news site 6. Here's my news site. Here's my source. I've already copied over my source file or source directory from news site 5. Here it is. Here I added some additional functionality, but it's pretty much all the same. And I already ran the update. So let's do npm run start to ensure everything is up and running and we don't get any errors. Ooh. I'm gonna bring this over here. Does anybody have any questions of what we're doing right now?
Hey, Tom. So if we have either Moment or React Strap, Material UI, and we don't want to have to install those every time, how do we add those to our package.json file so when we install it, we don't have to do that every time?
You can literally just go into your package.json. It's easier just to install it every time because you're just going to have to come in here and type in like Moment, and then you're going to have to look up at what version you're currently running, and you have to like type it out. So it's just easier to just run npm install, and it's going to automatically add it to your package.json file right here.
So install them before you run npm install?
So it doesn't really matter. Like you can run, what I do, I usually just run npm install, then it installs everything, and then whatever libraries, other libraries I need, I install them individually. So hopefully I already installed everything, so it should be working. So after npm installed what's already there, I would npm install Moment, at material UI core, at material UI icons, React Strap, but I've already kind of installed everything I needed. I'm not using Material UI in this one because Oh, hold on a second. Sorry, shut the door. So yeah, the best thing is just npm install and then npm install the stuff individually. So it's npm start again. So app is refreshing. So here's my article. New site. So I've got opinion, world page, national. Got the add article. I've got some React strap here. Got the login page right here. I'm going to go back. I want to make sure everything works. Can you guys hear that? That like can you hear background noise?
I don't hear
Like
you.
minimal.
Okay, all right, it'll be good. So I've got a home link that just takes me home. If I go to world, do I have like yeah, I've got a back button down here. I can search Nostrum. So I've got live search right now, so I don't necessarily need this button right now, but I'll just leave it. Add article, login. I'll look over here to see if there's any errors. So my login page, I've got null. I'm doing something there. So let's look at my login page. So yeah, it looks like I'm console logging the username and password. So if I do tom@email.com, 123. So I've got, okay, so I've got some conditional formatting. So here's my Tom123 being logged out. And then just for the fun of it, I kind of went a little bit further on login submit. I set is logged in. So after a user logs in, sets the username and password to state. Then I set the set is logged in to true. And then I've got some logic here. Is logged in, login. Then I've got, if the user isn't logged in, I've got logged out, which is a button. When I click it, it resets set is logged out to false. So if I log out, okay. We're gonna kind of like scrap that because we're gonna be moving to an actual login page with credentials. So let's go initial setup, user API, login. So far we've only utilized a single type of object model from the API, the article API, things that are related to article. In today's challenge, we'll be dealing with a new model, the user. While it's not required, I consider it helpful to make separate JavaScript modules for interacting with different models of data. So general best practice, if you're sending an API request to some sort of different model like articles, you'll have just like an articles API endpoint, and anything related to users, you'll have a separate users API. And if you have like another API endpoint like tasks or something like that, like you'd have a tasks API and you'll have them all in separate files. So as such, let's create an API.js module in users API. A dummy file has already been created. So in our API, we have API. We already have the skeleton created for us. We have export default login. Here's our login. It looks like it accepts credentials object. Don't know what that means yet. So credentials object. The login function accepts a parameter called credential object. The structure of the object that this function should accept looks something like this. So I'm going to put that down here. This function should create a request that's almost identical to the add articles function. All right, so I'm going to actually just grab the add articles method. Oh, wow, that's a lot. So in my add article, Let's see if I can even add an article. Add article. Add article. Some byline. Abstract. Some abstract. I might not be able to right now because of the new app and only allows logged in users. So let's just see what happens. So since since I updated this app, there's some logic that only requires logged in users to post. So add article, post. So it looks like I got an error. And then here I just add some error message, error status. Just actually feel like 404 or 401. And something else, 404. So I send this error message back to the articles page. So here's my add article. So when I added it, then I get some data back. If data.message equals success, your article was posted, else set post message, which is a state. There was an issue posting your article. Then I've got literally just some conditional logic. If post message right here, if it exists, which is currently null, but if I get an error back or I get a success message back, it creates an alert message, which I created a separate component for. Alerts, passes in that message, then I get, it creates like a, whatever that was. It's, what is it called? React strap. Alerts. It just sends one of these back. So if I try to do it without a user that's logged in, I get an error posting. There was an issue posting your article. It doesn't really describe what the error is, but ideally you want a description of like, hey, only logged in users are able to. So all it should be made. So the function should create a request that almost looks identical. So I'm doing the login API request. So it should look identical, like pretty similar to add article. So I'm just going to delete that, close that, close that. So it should look something like this. So I should grab an article object, probably a user object right here, credentials object. And then should I do a try catch? Or should I just do .then? Does anybody have a preference? No?
.then?
.then? We'll do a .then. So return, fetch. And then I gotta type in some URL here. And so I'm gonna copy this down here. Format document. So needs some URL. I don't know what that URL, where am I supposed to post it to? Okay, it looks like right here. HTTP users login, include user. So that's the URL. And then the credentials object should be stringified and passed in the request body, and the content type should be set to application JSON. The function should return a fetch promise that will resolve later. Okay. Oh, it says there's a unit test that verifies the expected behavior of user login. Once that test succeeds, you may proceed to the next section. So first, let's take that, put that there, return. With .then, you get a response. And then let's return the response. Say, said we'll resolve it later. So see if this works. Oh shoot, getting errors. I'll log in. Just gonna refresh. I'm gonna start this again. Just to see if anything, nothing actually should change. Log in, no. But I'm gonna run that test. Kill that. I'm actually gonna run that on a separate server, CD, desktop, kilo challenges, news site, 6, npm start. I'm just gonna keep this running in a separate terminal. Development server. Cool, everything's the same. But now here I'm actually gonna run the test. npm, I'm gonna run this users API.test. npm run, just npm test, users API.test.js. Oh, npm. Oh, come on. What? Oh, sweet. That's okay. So I passed that test. I just want to examine this test. So it grabs users API, it has some testing libraries that we need. It logs in, done. Fetch mocks, it sets a fetch API request or post request. Passes in success equals true. We have a fake user object. And then returns user API, user login. Okay, cool. If I threw like, yeah. So we passed that test. Nice. All right. What's next? It says once we pass that test, we're able to move forward. Storing the user object token. On. Okay. When valid credentials to the API login endpoint are provided, the API response will look something like this. So this is what the response will look like. Interesting. We want to call user API login from the login page. You'll need to store the response object in the top level state of your app inside app.js. This is because this data will you need to pass down to different pages. So in order to store the user object in the app state, you will need create a class method, okay, that accepts the user object as a parameter and sets it into state, then pass that method into the login page. Okay, so for an item A in paragraph above, let's create a method called handle login. So we need to set state. Oh, where is it? So in our app.js, in here, do I even need that? So in here, we need to create a state of a user because we want to pass this user down to props in in all these different, not all of them, but in different components. So we need state. State equals user, we're going to set it to null first. And then this handle login user sets the state. So where are we going to be passing this handle login method down to? So this login page, this is because this is where we want to actually log in. I'm going to split that. So we've got this handle login user, or handle login, and accept a user object that sets the state in our app.js, our top, very top level component to user. And we're going to want to use this handle login somewhere, essentially like right here, it's called login submit, but we're going to call it handle login later. Let's see. Passing this method into login component does require you to use some functionality availability from React Router's route component that we haven't used before. That's called the render prop. So render prop React Router. So I'm just looking through the documentation. Hooks. I don't want to see hooks. React Router route props. So we have redirect. Route. Trying to find it. Here we go. So router, this route that we are currently using right here in their top level, that tells us at what specific URL, what component to render. Render child. So we have, right now we've been using the component property. So the component to render only when the location match is, it will render that given component. So that's what we've been doing here with this component property. But now we have this render property. This allows for convenient inline rendering and wrapping without the undesired remounting explained above. Instead of having a new React element created for you using the component prop, you can pass in a function to be called when the location matches. The render property function has access to all the same route props does, match, history, location, as a component render prop. So it looks like here, here's an example. Instead of passing in component, we pass in a function that renders something, that returns some JSX. So the component property we've used thus far accepts a component as a value. So let's just create this. I'm going to copy that. And in between the render and return is where we want to do actual JavaScript. Because up here, this is all classes, but down here, we just want to create a function. We have a const render login page function that accepts props, and it literally just returns the login page component. And we're passing in some props, passing in history, and we're passing this handle login method. So, and instead of this component, we're going to render, and we're going to call, what is it, this, and we just call render login page. I think that's all we have to do. I don't think we need like this, because it's all within here, because this is its own function. So we just declare another function called render login page, and we render it down here. Let's see if anything's changed. All right, so I've got this login. When I go to /login, it still renders everything. And in our login page, which is right here, So I don't think we need, we're gonna like pretty much delete all this eventually. But let's console log props. To see if this, so here's our login page, which is inside this render login page function. And we're essentially calling this render login page function down here in this render property when it matches this \login. So it comes in here, runs this, returns this login component, passes in history, and passes in login or handle login as a property. Oh no, props is not defined. Why isn't the props defined right here? It's because I'm not passing in props in the login page. So if I refresh it, over here on the right-hand side in my console, I've got props, I've got the history, and I've got this handle login method, handle login function that accepts a parameter, which is user. So that works. Let me stop for questions. What questions do you have?
Why is that function, the login, going into the apps and not the login page?
So why is this going into the apps?
Yeah.
So app.js is at the very highest level of our application. And we want to store our user, whether our user is logged in, at the very top of our application, because we're going to want to pass this user down to other components. So if I set the user to just right here in the login page, I can't really pass the user to other components. So like, if I wanted, like in this challenge, only logged in users are able to add an article. So I need to be able to like pass in whether the user is logged in or not to the add article component. And right now, whether or not the user is logged in only resides in the login page component, I can't pass it around to like the add article page.
Okay.
Now, if I had like the add article page down here within my login page, I'm able to pass down like full page. Like for whatever reason, if I had the add article component down here, which I can, but it really wouldn't make any sense if is user logged in, and render that, and then I can pass in like the user down here as a property in the login page. But the way our app is structured, the login page and the add article page are essentially almost on the same level.
Okay.
So I can't pass in the user. There's not an easy way for me to pass in whether or not the user is logged in from the login page to the like add article page. Because you can only pass down props from child or parent to child.
Right. So if you have the user login dependency, it's easier to pass it down to the children if it's at the top level.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yep. And this is how we essentially pass down state from the parent, which is the app, down to a login component through a route, using this render property that renders a login page, which is a function that accepts props, and it can set, like you can add anything here. You can add like another property. Oh, now why isn't that not working? Oh. So like right here, now I've got like another property that just says another prop. No. So that's how you do that.
Okay, cool.
Any other questions? All right. So, and it gives us the route exact path login using render, and then renders that login method. And the function provided, the render prop of the route is a single argument. It gives some more, a little more explanation. So it assumes that your login page has a login form, and that login form's on submit event is called an event handler, and it handles, it's been done that, you'll need to do that in order to proceed. So it looks like, login page. In here is where I'll want to, in my login page, I'm going to want to use this handle login method that accepts a user. So I don't even need this anymore. Log in, log out. I probably don't need this anymore. We'll just leave that right now. Don't need this. I'm just going to delete everything except for the form. Let's save it, make sure everything still works. Cool. So when I on submit, so here's my form, and when I click the button submit, it's going to call this login submit. But I don't want to use that anymore. I want to start using this handle login. Or no, this is actually where I want to make that API request first to the user, the login API. So in here, prevent default, let user equals, I need to create a credentials object, username, that takes in an email, and password, event.target. So I don't even need the state anymore. I can actually get rid of, just like comment that out for the time being. And then I'll do that user API request. So the first thing I need to do is import this login. I don't know why that's there. Import user API from API users API. And you want to do async await here. Let's do async await. Async. And then let response equals users API dot login. And we want to pass in that user object. So user API, we need to await. Then let's just console log response. I don't know, let's see what happens. So users API, so we're just returning this. Okay. Oh no, username, password not defined. Down here on line 24, not doing that anymore. All right, Tom at email.com, 123, 123. Oh, shoot. Oh yeah, I don't think I have an actual logged in user. Okay. So unauthorized, think. So I just typed in a random email that isn't necessarily stored in our database right now. Let's look at our the README. It says right here, this is the email and password to use for the API today. So I can say John Doe, and open sesame. John at doe.com, and open sesame. That didn't work. I spell it wrong? Probably. Just copy this. John Doe. Open Sesame. Oh no. Why did it return false? Oh, email? What did I put? Username. That might be it. Do that again. John Doe at Sesame. John@doe.com. Open Sesame. Okay, cool, no errors. Login page 19, that's where we're console logging it? Well, 19, let's look at what we have. All right, this is a response. So now what do we have to do? How do we normally parse a response? Await, let user equals response.json, console log user. So I don't like using John Doe. So if you go all the way up in your very top level API, if you go to common, nope. If you go to server, model config, nope. I want to change, we already have like data store, data sources, nope. I want to change the user. Where'd it go? The temp. Oh, boot, authentication. Okay, yeah. So, so if you go all the way up to the very top and you want to change like the username logins, if you go to server, boot, sample models, here are all the models that we can use, or here are like usernames. I'm going to add another one that's for ease of use, my name, which is my name. I'm going to do Tom at email.com. And this is literally just for testing purposes. 1, 2, 3. All right. Oh no, what's going on? Oh, user already has user data. User data. So I'm going to do Tom at email.com. It's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or is it just 1, 2, 3? Oh, shoot. I got to start the server again. So since I added another user, I'm going to have to, no, why does it open another page?
Why did adding another user require a restart?
Because the whole server essentially has to restart from scratch. And that's just for the testing purposes. You don't have to add another user if you don't want to. I just did it because I want to use my name. So here, there we go. Login page line 20. Await user response. Promise. So here, return fetch to then response dot JSON. At email.com. Login page. Let's see what's going on. Response. tom@email.com. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So in my, right here, I'm doing .then.response.json. If I do it here on the back end, I don't need to do it here on the front end. So my response can just be user data. And let's see what we get back. tom@email.com. 1, 2, 3. Here's what we get back. We have this ID, which is, this is the token. This is that alphanumeric token, TTL. I forgot what that stands for. Does anybody know what TTL stands for? TTL, token, I don't know. Not quite sure what that means. I'll look it up. Then we got the created at, like what time the token was created at. We have the user ID, which is 4. Then we actually have the user Tom, email.com, and the ID. So we actually get an actual user back. And what do we want to do with this user? Does anybody know?
You want to give them permissions to add articles, pretty much?
Pretty much, yes. And how do we do that? First we need, so we're getting a user back. But where are we storing this user data within the context of the application? So if I come back here in our props, we have this handle login that accepts a user that we're receiving from the app.js, which is a top-level endpoint or top-level component of our app. So we're handling and we're setting state to that user up here. We're passing this handle login all the way down to the login page. So down here, we can actually call props.handle login and then pass in user data. And I'm going to console log within the render, just app state, this state.user. I'm going to get rid of this props login page. All right, and I'm going to log in, tom@email.com, 1, 2, 3. So here's my initial app state is null, and then when I click submit, the app state has changed to include the token, the title, or I don't know what this stands for, the created at date, the user ID, and the full username. Now that is stored at the very top of our app. Now we can pass it down to different areas. Let's take a 7 or 6 minute break. Be back at